minute, but the first thing I'm going to do is giveaways. I have 4 products that I'm going to give away for free, but you have to answer these questions, okay? And the first person to answer, raise your hand and I'll call on you. The first person to answer gets the prize. Okay, so the first one is my book, Finding My Way in Milwaukee. It is my testimony of how I became a Christian, then a Seventh-day Adventist, when I was barely out of my teens. And the question is, St. Louis was the first city to host the Olympics. What year? 1904. Good, impressive. Did you get that from? Okay, anyway, it's kind of there in the other questions. The Gateway Arch, this prize is a music. I used to do a lot of music. This is a music project that goes through the Passion story, and I did it with my kids when they were younger. There's songs and there's also narration. It's very beautiful, very devotional. And the question is, the Gateway Arch is the tallest monument in the world at how many feet? What's that? Do you know?
610.
Okay.
630.
He's right. I was going to give it to you if nobody got closer, but all right. How many visitors came to the World's Fair in 1904? Over 1 million, over 8 million, or over 19 million? Well, this is going to be hard because I'm going to have to do. Anybody know? And the prize is this book, Damsel Arise. It's a book by a woman, for women, about women. It's a devotional book. Yeah. You're right. You're right. There you go, sweetheart. It's a lot of people. That was a lot of people. And then finally, this is Hey Everybody, Good News. It's a kids CD. What other firsts can St. Louis claim? So this is a kind of an open question, but if you have any others that are on my list, I will give you the prize. So what are the other firsts that St. Louis can claim? All right, go ahead.
Charles Lindbergh's flag.
I don't have that one, but that's fine. I'll assume it's true. Really? Really? Lindbergh? Look it up on your phone. Okay, you might have to give that away, but take it for now. And so here are some of the other firsts. Is the first brewery, in the United States, the first gas station in the United States, and the first car accident. Because you had cars, I guess. Take one of those and pass it. All right, so I want to talk to you about Abide Network. This is the ministry that the Lord has given me for now to run. To get to the website, all you have to do is put in abide.network. No extension, no .com, no .org. Abide Network is a mental health coaching and education ministry. We help people with their mental health. It all came out of something I went through when I was a young mom, living out in the country. You know, we're supposed to be way out in the country. And we were way out in the country. I had little kids at home. I was homeschooling and doing everything right. But I was very isolated. I had a trauma history. I started having some health problems, and I ended up in clinical depression. And I had no one to talk to, no one to help me. Of course, I wouldn't have felt comfortable with a purely secular approach. There was no such thing as phone counseling at the time. There was no internet at the time. And as a result, I ended up in depression for a lot longer than I needed to be. So I purposed in my heart a few years later to study what happened to me during that period and how could I get out of it faster. And I ended up learning a lot about mental health, and then decided I wanted to be able to offer that kind of service to others. And as a result, the Lord, step by step, has grown this ministry to now we have over 50 mental health coaches that we train internally in a faith-based approach to mental health. We actually work with Southern Adventist University, to train their biblical counselors and so forth. So that's Abide Network. Go to the website and check it out. One of the things we do, one of the free services we offer is something called Jesus Meditations. This is a project. Do you guys know Neville Peter? The guy he's blind and he sings and plays piano. Do you know who I'm talking about? He's like, well, people call him Neville, but his name is actually Neville. So, what did I do with my phone? I'm always losing things. So Neville is, he's a very good singer-songwriter. And during the pandemic, he couldn't tour. And that's his livelihood. That's how he and his family survived. So he and I ended up working together on this project called Jesus Meditations. What we did was we created 120 audio meditations that start with this breathing song. They continue in a devotional that I share, and then he sings a scripture song. And I'm just going to pull this up, and we're going to do this breathing song together. This is designed to slow and deepen your breathing. And so what I'm going to have you do is create resistance by making a very small hole with your lips so that you can breathe in and out with a very, very thin stream of air. My internet connection seems very sketchy here. Okay. So what we're going to do is breathe like this. So we're going to breathe into 6, hold for 2, and out to 8. Okay, breathe all the way out first. Now breathe in.
1, 2, breathe deep. Inhale,
Hold. Now breathe out.
release, exhale. So slow, stress, fear, let go.
Now breathe in.
1, 2, breathe deep. Inhale,
Hold. Now breathe out.
release, exhale. So slow, stress, fear, let go.
Now breathe in.
1, 2, breathe deep. Inhale,
Hold. Now breathe out.
release, exhale. So slow, stress, fear, let go.
Couple more times. Breathe in.
1, 2, breathe deep. Inhale,
Hold. Now breathe out.
release, exhale. So slow, stress, fear, let go.
One more time. Breathe in.
1, 2, breathe deep. Inhale,
Hold. Breathe out.
so slow, stress, fear.
How do you feel? It's calming, isn't it? Okay, everybody, put your heads down on your pew, and we'll take a little nap right now. Know what I mean? So anyway, we start out with that song, and then we go right into the devotional, and then we have a prayer, and then he has a scripture song, and they're powerful as a devotional tool, as an anxiety management strategy. Highly recommend, and totally free. Just go to jesusmeditations.org. We have an anxiety and depression relief course. Actually, we have a number of courses. We have an abuse, trauma, and faith course. I'm going to be talking somewhat from that course today in a few minutes here. And then we have a ministry where we teach people how to respond or prevent and then respond to abuse in a church context, specifically sexual abuse in a church context. It's been going on too long that someone acts out in that way and they just get moved. This isn't okay. We need to make sure that that doesn't happen in the church, and we are about that. I work with a lawyer on that project. We have a coach training. As I mentioned, we have over 50 trained mental health coaches, and we do a training on our platform for that. I have a series I'm working with David Asherick on called Try This at Home, a series supporting the family, because we believe in the family. It's a wonderful social unit, and the family is under attack from within and without. So we're trying to build marriages and trying to help people with parenting. We're going to do a unit on dating. We're doing one of these workshops in a couple weeks here. We've done about 10 of them. So really excited to be working with David on that project. We also have free telephone support groups, or what you might call book clubs. These books that I've written are a faith-based approach to mental health, and they break down basically human psychology from a biblical and scientific standpoint. And these telephone support groups use them cyclically, and we also encourage people to run these groups in their churches, because these books are written as a group study guide. So if you feel like your local church needs more mental health, this is a great way to do it. Just go ahead and do a chapter a week like you would any book club. We have a Friday night Bible study that's still going strong. It began in COVID, and we just kept it going. It's basically an online church called Food for the Heart, and you are welcome to come to that. Just to give you a kind of a overview, we have over 60 certified coaches. We've had over 2,000 coaching clients throughout the life of the ministry. We've sold over 600 online courses and thousands more seminars, because I do a lot of public speaking. And our website has had over 21,000 visitors. So keep Abide Network in your prayers, and go ahead and, if you want to use that QR code to get to the website, you can do that. Any questions about Abide or anything I've shared? You good? What's that? Did you say something? No. Yeah, I think it's the same. All right, so let me do the quiz from this morning. Just pipe up. The study of why a good God allows evil and suffering is called what? The Odyssey. The Odyssey, not theology. What is a part of theology? God is both freedom granting and what? Sovereign. Excellent. God's will can be perfect, permissive, and or redemptive. Exactly. You guys are great students. You've done fantastic. Did we pray? I can't remember. Did you pray? No. Okay. Why don't you have our opening prayer and we'll jump in. Oh, wait a minute. You have the prayer, and then I'm going to see if anyone has any questions or comments from this morning, and then we'll jump in. Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Kind, loving Heavenly Father, we thank you for this privilege to spend time discussing mental health, and we are thankful that you care about every aspect of our lives, and we pray a blessing upon Jennifer and all those present in the name of Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Do we have a freestanding mic somewhere that if people want to ask a question or make a comment? Yeah, that'd be great. So this is your time. Talk to me. What made sense from this morning, or what questions do you have, or what comments do you have? This is your time to share. Oh, there we go. Good. Yeah? Gladys, right? Darlene. Yeah. I knew it was one of those like really classic names.
I was really impressed and thankful for the backstory that you gave to our God, because I think that's so valuable. I know it's valuable in personal inner relationships, but so that people get a better understanding that, you know, he is somebody you can trust, and we just have to know him, and then we know we can trust him. Yeah. And to understand that he has, I guess, parameters that he's operating within. Yeah. and not to judge him unfairly.
He's up against things
Yes.
that we don't see on the surface, that's right. And I'm sure in the human realm, y'all have experienced misjudging someone because you didn't have the whole story. Very good. What else was helpful or meaningful to you from this morning so far? Hello, beautiful. I heard how he met you.
What's that?
You're a student. You're his English student.
Yeah.
I know all about you, girl.
I'm not sure if I can word it properly, but when you talked about church people, you can come to church all your life, but if you view God as loving God, okay, you will be, what was that?
Your religious exercises will increase your mental health.
Yes, but the opposite, right?
Right.
If
I mean, that's what the science says, that if we have you see God as punitive, then the more you pray, the worse you,
that hit me in a way because, not because for myself in a way, but because of our children who are not in the church anymore.
Yeah.
I am responsible in a way. That's how I view, because I didn't
Now,
reflect
I thought
God
you guys were just
properly.
married 7 years, right?
Yes.
27.
Oh, 27.
Yes.
Oh, I thought you said 7. I was like, how did you have kids in 7 years and they're grown? That was quick. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
No, because
Yeah.
if I didn't reflect God in a proper way, and my children wouldn't have the proper true
Yeah.
character of God,
Yeah.
in their mind.
One of the things David and I are going to do, or I'm going to do, make sure happens when we write the parenting material, is deal with parenting guilt. And Adventist parents in particular put a lot of guilt and responsibility on themselves for their children's spiritual condition. But let me ask you, are you in touch with your kids?
Off and on.
Off and on. So they're dodgy about your relationship with them. They're inconsistent. Sometimes they want to talk to you and sometimes they don't.
When they are in need.
Yeah. Yeah. Just when they need something. Yeah. How many kids? I'm sorry. I know. I have friends whose kids won't even speak to them. It's major right now, and part of the reason that it's major has nothing to do with Adventism. It has to do with social media. I'll give you a little exercise to do that will help you understand this phenomena. It may or may not be the case in your particular situation, but why it's happening on a broad scale is pretty easy to figure out. Go to a search engine online and put toxic parents, and you will see countless coaches, courses, books instructing children how to cut their parents off. Then put in a search engine, honor parents, and you will find Bible verses, and that's it. You can see where the culture is going. Where the culture is going is dishonoring parents on a mass scale like we've never seen before. And a lot of it is mediated by social media, because social media has this effect on the brain of putting things in black and white and sort of paring human relationship complexities down to very simple dynamics like victim and perpetrator. Like every relationship boils down to a power differential, which is not true. Human relationships are complex and multi-layered. But what's happening is kids are being encouraged to cut their toxic parents out of their lives, and that's thought to be some kind of noble act of bravery and courage. And so that may or may not be impacting in your situation. But I would just encourage you, I feel for you, and I've been through some of that myself as a parent with grown kids. And I would just encourage you not to overblame yourself. You did have some power. You did probably your best, am I right? At the time. I mean, were you like doing stuff with your kids that you knew was bad and you did it anyway, or were you just trying to do the right thing?
I did what I
Okay. Thank you. I'm like noticing a little hyper-conscientiousness here, I think, in you. Like you're very willing and inclined to blame yourself for things. I just feel that.
No, it's not the culture. I know I made mistakes.
You did, okay.
Yes.
But where do you see that if you make a mistake in a relationship, the relationship is a bust, like it's over? Like mistakes they're allowed. If it was a massive mistake and there was like abuse going on, that'd be a different thing. Then you could blame yourself. But I think it's bigger than you, and I think you're probably being hard on yourself. That would be my gut feeling. What do you guys think? She's nodding over there. Her head's gonna fall off. She's nodding so hard. So anyway, but I think there's some parenting guilt, but I think also we have to realize it's not us that they left. In many cases, it's the Adventist church. And the Adventist church is full of weird people, and things happen to them in the context of the church that we didn't have control of, So that can be part of it. And the world is very powerful, and it seduces our children, and they can walk away from God, So it's a mix of all of those things. But it's never over until it's over. You keep praying. I think that some of our kids are going to come back to the Lord after we're gone. After we've, passed off the scene. I think that some of them, we never know. We never know what's going on. Go ahead.
Well, I would just say both of our kids were kind of sexually abused in their teenage years.
Okay. They call everything abuse.
Well,
Everything
Yeah.
abuse.
no. Well,
No.
They overuse the word abuse.
well, that was another
That's an issue.
issue.
That's
That
part
was
of the whole
another
social
issue
media
also between us as parents by disciplining them.
But
That was
our
abuse.
son was,
But,
He
well,
was
no,
what?
Our
no.
son was sexually
Hannah was groped. Didn't you know that?
Oh.
Was it by,
It was by an elder
Okay.
in the church.
Okay, yeah,
Not in this country.
Not in this country, though.
Yeah.
It was when they were on a mission trip.
okay.
So, it's been, even one of our good friends talked to her about it, and she said, well, what did God do to you? Because it was these people in the church who actually, and she didn't have an answer for her, that God abused her. Just these people
Wow.
who were representing God in
Yeah.
ways.
I'm going to talk tomorrow about Project Safe Church, but it's basically a ministry that I run that prevents and then responds to sexual abuse in a church context. We take reports, and there's people that don't like me or that they don't trust me because we do that, but I just, in my conscience and in my soul, I cannot not do something about the problem. I don't think it happens super broadly in Adventism, but I want it to happen zero in Adventism. I want it, and the best defense is a good offense. The best way to prevent sexual abuse is to deal with it very decisively when it happens and to apply consequences very quickly and strong consequences. If you have a church on the corner and both their youth pastor and their senior pastor get dismissed for impropriety, the predators are not going to try to get hired at that church because they're going to know the board is tough. Do you see what I'm saying? So if we had that systemically, like collectively in Adventism on a broad scale, these people deal with it when it happens, and they deal with it very, very decisively, we're going to have less, the word's going to get out, don't even bother with an Adventist church. That's how I want it to be. That is my goal for Adventism, is complete eradication. And it should never happen. And I'm not convinced that it happens more here or anything like that. In fact, I think it happens probably less, because when you have the level of infrastructure we have so much interconnectedness We have somewhat of a hierarchy in the GC, so there's opportunity for a lot of sort of systemic messages going out. Like if something happens at my church, I know a lot of people and I'm going to warn about people. So we have a lot of interconnectedness, which tends to be protective. I don't think it happens more in Adventism, but I want it to happen zero. And I think our policies could be better and our procedures could be better. And I solicit your prayers on that because I'm working with various people. Adventist Risk Management, this guy at the NAD hired me recently to do research a situation, and I work with Nicholas Miller, he's a religious liberty guy, and we work together on this, and we're trying to create some strategies that move toward eradication. Why not, you know? We want this to be a refuge. We want the church to be a safe place. And how can the church be a safe place while it's a safe place for unsafe people? So anyway, obviously a bit of a soapbox, but I'll pray for your kids. I get you. Quite a few of us parents are struggling with the same questions. Paul, did you have a comment or?
Relating.
Yeah. Anyone else? Go ahead, sister over here. Oh. Oh, you turned it off. You're so efficient.
Yeah, she's automatic with that. I think that we have, as parents, and for myself, we learn something as we want our children to do the things that we've learned to do when I wasn't born and raised an Adventist.
Yeah.
So I think that you want your children to do as we're all growing and learning. And then when they hit their certain ages of their teen years or whatever, and they want to turn and make some of their own decisions.
Yep.
And sometimes we as parents get a little bit fearful of that.
Right.
So sometimes maybe we push too much.
Yeah, I did.
And not learn where to let go and let them have some decision-making of their own.
Yeah.
And I know for my own, my daughter walked and went away. And Ruth Stout's books, Praying God's Will for My Daughter, Praying God's Will for My Son, those are very good references, both of them. But my daughter, in her very last week before she died.
Your daughter died.
Yes, I lost my daughter.
I'm so
Our
sorry.
daughter. And it was not, she came back to the Lord.
Wow.
It was not a deathbed experience
Right,
type
right.
thing for her. She wasn't that type of person.
Right, right.
And there's a lot into the story where our oldest son and daughter-in-law came and she took care of, because I couldn't health-wise.
Yeah.
I went every day and I cooked the meals for them. We stayed with some friends who lived close by.
Okay.
And, but yes, you know, you never know how things are going to be.
Wow.
And I have a sister-in-law, ex-sister-in-law now, that years ago she said, "Oh, Mary, I wish Mom could see me now," because she went the gamut and turned the other way.
Yeah, yeah.
And then she came back
Came back.
after her mother had passed.
Wow.
And now she's giving Bible studies to the neighborhood women and
Beautiful.
really involved very much. But God is faithful. That's the thing.
Yeah. I love that testimony. Thank you for that. And you're right, you know, it's not over yet. And your daughter came back. What a beautiful testimony. I'm sorry you lost her, but that kind of had to be a little bit of a consolation. Yeah. Very good. Hi.
I really appreciate your message about safe church, and
Yeah.
you're right. We need to be firm on this and not let that
Yeah.
take any foothold. My husband and I left a church because of that.
Yeah.
We had pled with the church board for 13 months not to do something that would leave the young families unprotected.
Yeah.
And ultimately, it went to a church business session, And again, there was pleading. For 3 months, there were meetings. And, just please, let's have accountability. Let's have monitoring. Let's have firm protection. And the sad thing is, they said, no, we don't want to offend this person. And so they sacrificed potential safety of every child in that church because of that, because we don't want to offend one person who got out of prison, federal prison, after 15 years.
Oh.
What you're doing is so important. I appreciate that so much. We have to take care of our little ones and protect them because, like what Brad and Yoon-hee said, just one experience with someone who has the church name or a position of leadership can make them veer off to the side and blame everyone and blame God when that was not his plan, obviously.
Well, I wasn't planning on doing this, but I want to tell you, like, if I could take the whole work, I do a whole training on this, how to prevent and respond to abuse in a church context. And if I could boil the whole thing down into the single, basically, power weapon that the superpower that the Lord has shown me really works, is you have to get the victims, the alleged victims' testimony in writing. It has to be 1 to 2 pages. It has to be short. It has to be to the point. There can't be any lecturing or any emoting or any extraneous, superfluous data, because people write to varying levels of capability, and not everybody can write very well. So you work with the person to get it very clear and very concise and very detailed, and you have them sign it. And then you take that statement and you share it with the appropriate people. Had a situation where I was with a group that hired a company to do a production, and the team came in. They had an 11-year-old boy with them. And I thought it was weird. He wasn't any of their relative. I asked about it. They said, he's just a kid from the neighborhood. He really likes us. He travels with us. So I kind of shelved it. 8 years later, on our website, I got a report from a girl whose brother had been abused by the director of that ministry. I followed up on that one. I got the report from that guy. I reached out to the 11-year-old who is now in academy. Sure enough, he had been abused by the same guy. And then there was a third individual I was told about that I talked to on the phone, got a report from him, signed, concise, clear reports, put all those, and then I looked at the guy who was doing all this abusing. His path in life was to constantly set up these ministries for children, or for like adolescent age, 10 to 12 to 13-year-old kids. That was his modus operandi. And he would go from one ministry to another, always ministering to that age group. Turned out he was engaged to someone who had 3 boys in that age group. So I got this report together, got everything all organized, gave it to the right people, and I didn't even do it myself. I gave it to Nick, the lawyer, and he distributed. The guy was let go. I mean, there was very, very strong evidence from 3 different people on this guy. But the best part of it was that a social worker ended up with a report and gave it to the woman he was engaged to. She ended the engagement. And I felt that that was a victory. We've had a couple of other things happen since then. One report came, the young woman's father had molested her when she was young, and he was a pastor in another country. She wrote the report, but she said, I can't do this right now because her mother was going to die if she came out with it. Her mother died of cancer within the year. She came back to me at the end of the year. I'm ready. She gave it to the right people, and I had helped her write this report. She gave it to the right people. This guy had retired. He was a pastor, had retired, but now he was like traveling. You know how you're a retired pastor and you're like kind of special, and he was retired. He was preaching in different places. the conference came in and said, no more. I was so proud of them, and it was a foreign country, and sometimes in foreign countries things can be even worse. So those are just a couple of stories of, the way God has worked with these simple means of putting down on paper what people have been through and getting their name on it and then sharing it appropriately, carefully, because obviously we never want to falsely accuse someone, or that can ruin a person's life too. So we have to have evidence, and sometimes we have to say, I believe you, but it's not actionable. We need more support, we need more evidence. It's complex and difficult, but I have seen God work. And when we're willing to do the difficult thing, the Lord will step in and streamline the process. But be prepared to be hated by some people who really don't want that kind of accountability. You will be hated, even if you're very, very careful and very reticent and very conscientious about it, you'll still be hated. So that's the whole training in like 5 minutes. Go ahead.
I think it's a very good that you're sharing this because I know in our own experience, I know my wife she's a very vigilant person. And I know that she was working as a teacher, and she saw a child who was, bruised and, something that she felt she had to say something about.
You had to say something.
And in saying something, she was not looked upon very favorably.
Right.
And as a result, I think she probably lost her job, later on because she was being vigilant. So instead of people being, encouraged, and yes, it is uncomfortable for somebody to be, pointed out as possibly as an abuser, but at the same time, the church has to realize that somebody is looking out for their children.
We also need to be okay with being held accountable, and that means that there will be times when there will be false accusations, and the person who is falsely accused needs to be brave and needs to let due process happen and not expect to be exonerated on the basis of the position they hold or how likable they are. I've seen that good old boys club mentality come in where there's a report that comes in about someone. It's not necessarily a substantive report, but the people are so offended that you're accusing him. And my thing is just let due process play itself out, because truth can stand up to investigation. And if you really are innocent, let the process roll out and we'll see what happens, You can defend your innocence, So we have to be willing to sit with some of that stuff, because there will be at times, very seldom I would say, but there will be at times false accusations, and we have to be brave enough and smart enough to deal with those as well. Any other comments? I did not expect this to happen, to talk about this particular issue, but it's obviously something that some of you have dealt with, and I'm sorry for what you went through with your children. That's really sad. We need to create an environment where it's zero tolerance. Am I right? Yes. Zero. All right, well, since we're talking about trauma, we'll just roll right into this talk about post-traumatic growth, because obviously when you're working with people in a very dangerous world, you're going to be dealing with some trauma, and all of us have a certain amount of trauma that we're dealing with as well. But I want to tell you good news about trauma, and that is it isn't the end, it's the beginning. It can be the beginning. So a couple stories to start with. This is villagers fleeing a South Vietnamese village that had been struck by napalm bombs. The girl in the middle is Phan Thi Kim Phuc, quote, the napalm girl, and she's crying, Nong Quai, too hot, because her back is on fire. That's right. She obviously survived, but many medical procedures later found herself a college student, extremely depressed, and wanted to take her own life. But she went into the library at her college and found a New Testament and met a loving Jesus. Guys, we don't realize what we have in the gospel, just a New Testament. Wasn't a fancy multimedia presentation about prophecy. It was just a New Testament. And she saw something she'd never seen before, a God of love. And she gave her life to God, and here she is today. Fanti Kim Fook, she's called she's a Goodwill ambassador, and she has authored a book called The Girl in the Picture, because that's a very famous picture. And she's found courage to move forward with her life. Isn't that a beautiful story? Here's another story. This is Kay Wilson. In December of 2018, she was a tour guide, and she and her friend, and the friend was a Christian, by the way, were attacked by Arab terrorists in a Jerusalem forest. Kay's friend died. She watched her friend killed in front of her eyes. And they left Kay for dead, but she lived and crawled to safety, though bleeding from 13 stab wounds, a punctured lung, diaphragm, a dislocated shoulder, a broken shoulder blade, and a broken sternum. Now, if you're someone with a strong stomach and you like to read, and I'm a very voracious reader and I love to read memoirs, read her memoir of this event and her healing process. It's called A Rage Less Traveled. She's a very clever writer, and she describes in detail not only the physical recovery process, but the emotional recovery process. She's a remarkable human being. She says, I believe with an imperfect faith in a God of justice who has promised that vengeance is his. And the question is not, why did this happen to me, but rather, how can I incorporate this grisly event into the rhythm of my life in a manner that guards me from becoming like those who tried to murder me? It's amazing what people can survive, isn't it? It's amazing what they can live through and go on to make profound statements like those. So I'm curious, how do you view trauma? I want to give you a message about trauma this afternoon that will be both realistic and grounded, but also helpful and hopeful. So I want to say this, that trauma is part of the story, but it is not the whole story. It does not determine who you become. I like to say nature and nurture create a disposition, but our choice is what determines destiny. So let's look at part of the story and get to know trauma a little bit better. The most common phrase that we hear or expression that we hear is PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And that's really the only diagnosis we really typically talk about. It's found in the Diagnostic Manual of the American Psychiatric Association and also the global manual called the ICD-10. It's a disorder that develops after exposure to a dangerous, horrifying, and or potentially life-threatening event that, and this is important, exceeds our present coping resources. Because your nervous system is designed to be resilient. You're designed to be able to handle a certain amount of stress. You get in a car accident, or maybe a traffic jam. You recover from that. I got bitten by a dog a couple years ago. I slept that night. My nervous system rallied. You have a disagreement with your spouse, and you guys kind of go your separate ways for a while. Then you come back together, you work it out. You're designed by God to be able to be resilient in the midst of stress. But there are things that assault the nervous system that will push you beyond what you can handle. And that causes apparently a literal injury to the nervous system. Trauma has a physiologic component to it. Some of the symptoms that develop include, and these are kind of clusters of symptoms, and I've simplified them down to 5 things. Number 1, intrusive memories, flashbacks, and nightmares. These are called revisitation symptoms. They involve the brain trying to bring that trauma back to our attention. It is thought that the brain is trying to process that memory. The way normal memory processing works is you go through an event, it's upsetting, your adrenal glands are very activated, your catecholamines fill your system, you're what we call emotionally flooded for a period of time. Like for instance, if you get into a fender bender, not a severe car accident, but a little crack up, you're gonna be reviewing what happened for a couple of days afterward. You're going to be upregulated for a little while, and you're going to be thinking, oh, he came out of the left, and then she came around to the right, and I didn't see if the light was green or red. Then all of a sudden, I hear this crack. You're going to keep reviewing that material because you're processing it. But eventually, you're going to be able to think about what happened without re-experiencing what happened, because your brain will have taken the emotional charge out of the memory. Then your brain can file that memory, and you can remember it without getting all upset all over again. Does this make sense? Are there some things that were upsetting at the time that you can think about now and you just talk about them? I had a friend who lost a leg in a car accident, and she would talk about it with a smile on her, like she was totally unfazed because she had thoroughly processed that memory. She had a lot of support, and God was good to her afterwards. She had a strong family. She could talk about it without re-experiencing it. That's what the brain is designed to do, but sometimes that process goes awry, and people, instead of being able to remember without re-experiencing, re-experience every time they remember. That's going to lead to the second feature, and that is a pattern of avoidance of reminders of the event, because if you're going to keep feeling awful every time you think about it, you're going to start avoiding things that remind you of that thing so that you can avoid feeling awful. Does that make sense? But these patterns of avoidance, it turns out, actually work against people in the long run. And so ultimately, when we're treating trauma, we have to help people get out of their patterns of avoidance. Also, a lot of negative thoughts and emotions tend to happen when we've been through some kind of trauma. It sort of negativizes us emotionally. Then there's also this sense in which the nervous system has been aroused and is kind of ratcheted up to an abnormally high level of reactivity. And then sometimes when these features and symptoms are overwhelming, we will have a pattern of avoidance of those things that's called dissociation, where you can be physically present but check out in your mind. And that's thought to be a way that the brain sort of anesthetizes us against, the trauma. So that's called dissociation. And again, it can be very helpful in the short term, but in the long term, it can work against a person when they're checking out all the time. There's another condition that we don't talk about as much, but is, I think, just as real, and it's called complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And it develops typically a little differently than PTSD. PTSD tends to be caused by one sort of catastrophic event. The three most common causes of PTSD are, number one, does anybody have a guess? Number one. That's more like two. Something more, what? No, that would be more CPTSD. PTSD, a life-threatening event. That's number three. And so what's number one? Traffic accident. Yeah, it doesn't even involve necessarily any kind of bad will on the part of a person. It's just a very common cause of PTSD. So those catastrophic events can cause this nervous system damage, and that's one big, or maybe a series of a few things that are going to cause this overwhelm. But CPTSD is caused by a number of smaller assaults on the person's safety or dignity, typically occurring when the person is in a close relationship with that person that they're being abused by, and typically in childhood, although not only in childhood. You mentioned divorce a minute ago. If people are in an abusive relationship or a very, very difficult relationship, that can, over the length of time, have a similar effect as a person being raised in a very unsafe home. So this is like, the difference is like this. Like if I were to punch Kyle in the jaw and break his jaw, that would be very catastrophic. But if I were to slap him on the face like this, that wouldn't be so bad, right? Unless I did this for like 5 days. And it would eventually break his skin, he'd get an infection, his face, it could be worse than the jaw, right? So that's how CPTSD develops. It's more gradual and it compiles. And as a result of CPTSD, you're going to have disrupted ability to trust and love, because typically this occurs in the context of intimate relationships. It's going to make self-regulation more difficult because children learn how to self-regulate from their parents. And if their parents aren't regulated, then the kids aren't going to learn that. So they're going to have a difficult time regulating as adults. And it can lead to self-blame and shame because the child blames themselves because that gives them the illusion of control. If I can just be at fault here, then maybe I can prevent it from happening in the future. Okay, so you with me so far? Raise your hand if you're with me. Okay, good. So let's talk a little bit about CPTSD, because we also use the expression big T trauma and small t trauma or little t trauma. I think very few of us here have probably encountered big T trauma. That's auto accident, active combat, sexual assault. Those are the causes, and very few of us probably have that. But most of us are going to have some little t trauma. We're going to have some part of our lives where we were in a situation that was a continual assault on our safety and dignity. So let's learn a little more about small t trauma and how it can affect people. This is Dr. Vincent Felitti. Dr. Felitti worked with the Kaiser Permanente hospital systems in California in their weight loss clinic. He noticed that people would leave the program even though they were losing weight. It was working, but they would leave. He started to ask himself why. He started to interview people that had dropped out. He was at the end of a long day. He was tired. He was interviewing an ex-patient. And instead of asking, at what age was your first sexual experience, he asked, what was your weight at your first sexual experience? And then pretty soon after that realized he'd asked the wrong question. It was just one of those brain freeze things. And she said 45 pounds. And he looked up at her, and she looked at him, she looked down at the floor and said it was my father. And in that moment, Dr. Felitti realized there's a connection here between trauma and why people are dropping out of the weight loss clinic. And over time, he took, and another part of the team, like a team of people, they did 17,000 interviews with people that had childhood trauma, and they established what is now called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Scale. How many of you have heard of ACEs or Adverse Childhood Experiences? Raise your hand. This is 10 simple questions that help people like in my field, and just people generally, get an understanding of how much small t trauma, CPTSD causing trauma happened in our childhood. And ultimately what Dr. Felitti and others realized is that the reason people were dropping out of the weight loss clinic was because they were medicating away trauma symptoms using food, or in some cases, accumulating extra weight on their bodies because it would prevent them from getting abused. Because there's an expression, to be overweight is to be overlooked. So they discovered a lot of things about trauma and the origins of it. So let me share with you this pyramid. This is called the ACEs pyramid. And what we know is that there will be a larger number of people. If we are talking about adverse childhood experiences, a larger number of those people will have literal disrupted neurodevelopment. The home environment is designed by God to literally cook that person's brain the right way, make a beautiful brain. You're really formatting a brain as a mother or a father, and if that goes wrong, there's going to be disrupted neurodevelopment. That's going to lead, chances are, to social, emotional, and cognitive impairment. And that's going to lead to the adoption of health risk behaviors. That's going to lead to disease, disability, and social problems, and potentially early death. So this is the ACEs pyramid. Now notice it's a pyramid. It's not a square, so that means that not everybody with these adverse childhood experiences is going to follow this trajectory, but a greater number of people do when they have these adverse childhood experiences. So let me show you what it looks like. This is Tom. Tom had alcoholic parents, an abusive father. He was molested by his uncle at age 6. He developed an anger problem, couldn't concentrate in school, ended up in gang life, married Jenna by 24 years old. He drank too much. He ended up beating Jenna. She left him. He went into a depression, used food and alcohol to medicate, withdrew from people, developed high blood pressure and heart problems, and died at 49. That's a really depressing picture of someone with lots of ACEs that then just followed that trajectory into early death. I've noticed in my clinical practice that trauma tends to be the mother of anxiety and mood disorders. So I will be talking to people and I'll say, when did these anxiety symptoms all start? And they'll say, well, when my parents divorced, or when we moved to such and such, or something will have happened that kind of gave birth to these anxiety or mood symptoms. And again, that can be because of literal nervous system damage. This is Bessel van der Kolk. He says after trauma, the world is experienced with a different nervous system. The survivor's energy now becomes focused on suppressing inner chaos at the expense of spontaneous involvement in their life. And here's a really great quote from Judith Lewis Herman. She says, "Trauma is an affliction of the powerless. The victim is rendered helpless by an overwhelming force. Traumatic events overwhelm the ordinary systems of care that give people a sense of control, connection, and meaning. Traumatic events are extraordinary, not because they occur rarely, but rather because they overwhelm the ordinary human adaptations to life." We call that sometimes bottom-up hijacking. And what we mean by that is the lower part of the brain actually siphons off energy from the higher regions of the brain. So a great way to sort of symbolize your brain or give you an illustration of your brain is put your thumb in your palm and put your fingers over your thumb. This could be the brain stem that controls the physical. This could be the limbic system that controls the emotional, and this is the cerebral cortex that controls the cognitive and volitional. What happens with bottom-up hijacking is this part of the brain gets so activated that this part can't function as well. And we all kind of know what that's like when we get emotionally flooded and we become irrational, right? I mean, if you get angry, you can sometimes think things that are just way off. And then when you calm down, you go back and realize I wasn't even thinking straight. I know for me, I took a medication once. The side effect was toxic psychosis. And it affected my brain and my ability of my brain to function properly. Should I tell you this? Maybe I shouldn't. I wrote Doug Batchelor, I think it was a 4-page single-spaced letter about why Amazing Facts, if they were going to oppose women's ordination, really needed to hire a woman evangelist. I didn't send it. Are you relieved? I didn't send it. I knew not to send it, but I was so emotional, I just had to write it. But then I looked at it later and I was like, oh, I'm so glad I didn't send this. I don't know if you guys know what I'm talking about, but anyway. Obviously, this bottom-up hijacking and this emotional flooding, when it's happening on a frequent level and you have this inner chaos that you're just struggling to suppress, is going to cause problems. And indeed, trauma predicts heart, liver, and autoimmune disease, high blood pressure, irritable bowel syndrome, fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue, dementia, anxiety, depression, OCD, and the list goes on. The number of conditions that are predicted, not necessarily caused, but predicted by traumatic events is very, very long. And you can see how it happens. If you're using alcohol to try to self-medicate or food to try to self-medicate, you end up with lifestyle diseases. And so one of the things we're realizing in the lifestyle world is we got to deal with the core issues. Were you trying to say something?
Yeah, I'm just wanting to ask what would be the difference between predicting and causing, or being a factor of?
Population research does not necessarily establish causality unless there is just such consistent outcomes associated, correlations that are just so overwhelming and so consistent that you can infer causality. But what they have to use to really establish causality is experimental research, where they can control all the variables and they can remove variables and put them back, and then they can see if something is causing something. Like if I am getting an upset stomach and I think I might be allergic to strawberries, and I take the strawberries away and the upset stomach goes away, and I put them back and I get sick again. And I do that several times. I'm going to pretty much know. I'm going to have established causality. So with population research, you're going to see patterns. You're not going to know for sure if this is causing this, but you can see that it predicts this. So I'll give you another issue, like homeschooling kids. They tend to have more income. If someone is homeschooled, they tend to have higher income as adults. But you don't know that the homeschooling is what made them earn more money. It could be that they had more trust funds or other variables that have allowed the mom to stay home. She didn't have to work a job. There could be a lot of variables. But you can eventually come to some level of certainty about causality if the prediction happens enough.
It's like a correlation.
Yeah. Okay. Correlation is, it says something, and prediction is like a correlation. But causality is another level. Like if you see the prediction over and over again, then you're going to be able to go, well, there's a really good chance of this. Yeah. I'm not much of a scientist, but I'm a little bit of one. All right, so let's look at the rest of the story. This has all been very depressing so far, hasn't it? I mean, and here's the thing is I was in my doctoral research, and I was looking at all the literature on trauma and reading stuff like this morning, noon, and night. I like to say I had trauma for breakfast, lunch, and dinner for 3 years, because I had a concentration in traumatology in my doctoral degree. So I started to ask myself, though, does trauma have to have the final word here? Because it kind of looks like people get traumatized when they're helpless and vulnerable, and it ruins them for life. That's a pretty sad picture. And it also didn't make sense biblically, because the Bible doesn't really say if you had a bad experience as a child, you're wrecked. In fact, the Bible tends to really preach resilience and coming back from great difficulty, and that people can go on in life and do great things. And so I wasn't seeing a lot of consistency between what these studies were saying and what the Bible was saying. And what I realized is that the studies were accurate, but they weren't giving the full picture. They were giving part of the story, but not the whole story. And the Bible, I felt, gave a bigger picture. So I started to ask myself, I wonder if there's some research in the science realm that talks about people coming back from trauma and thriving in spite of, or maybe even because of trauma. And that's when I discovered that there is scientific backing for that concept. Okay, so let's look at the biblical principle, and that is that God says he will restore those of us who got a bad deal. There's a wonderful quote in the book Ministry of Healing that says, for all that the world neglects to bestow, God will make up to us in the best of favors. God is so good to give us back when we have a loss or a trauma. So I'm very grateful for that. We also see scripturally so many survivors and thrivers. Noah making it. Can you imagine a world flood and all your neighbors get killed in front of your face? That's pretty traumatic. And then Abraham and 120 years of preaching and people making fun of you the whole time. This was not easy. Abraham, the whole leaving of his home and wandering in the wilderness amidst pagan tribes, handing his wife over a couple of times, then hearing God's voice telling him to sacrifice his own. So he did not have an easy life. What about Moses? Moses had a difficult life as well. He was leading a bunch of willful people. there was miracles, but there were also near-death experiences. We know so much about his life. What about David? David was pursued by the king of the nation that he felt called to the throne of, or heard God's voice calling him to the throne of. So, but he's pursued by that king who has a bounty on his head. Then Daniel, deported to Babylon as a teenager, probably castrated, and then forced to serve in a pagan court. And then Mary Magdalene, this beautiful woman who, from what we can see, was sexually abused by a clergy, which is the worst kind of sexual abuse, as some of you know. And she ended up being the vehicle through which Jesus was able to work. And he said, wherever this gospel is preached, what this woman has done will be told in memory of her. She created the most beautiful masterpiece of the gospel that any disciple created. So we can see that God can raise people back up after very shattering experiences. Are you grateful for that? I am so grateful for that. So anyway, what I started to realize is that, number one, there are treatments for trauma and people can recover. And I don't feel that in the literature I looked at that was strongly emphasized enough. Number two, people can grow from trauma in ways that they would not have if not for the trauma. So I want to look at those things now. Let's look at treatments first. I'm going to give you a number of practical tips. If you're someone who struggles with trauma symptoms, or you know people that do, you might think about sharing these or using them yourself. Number one, eye contact. Eye contact is very powerful. When I was giving birth to my first child, I had no anesthesia both times I had kids. I don't know what I was thinking. Granola mom. I'd probably do it the same again. But anyway, I could not take my eyes away from my husband. I had to look in his eyes, and then I would be able to bear it. Come to find out, there's some dopamine in the brain that people that are really into like biohacking and fasting and working out and, being healthy, some of these health influencers promote dopamine fasts. Dopamine fasting means no food, no sex, nothing that causes dopaminergic responses, which is the pleasure system in the brain. And part of dopamine fasting is no looking in people's eyes. Isn't that interesting? And that will reset your dopaminergic system, is the thinking. So physical touch is also very, very grounding and very powerful and very good for people. We need more hugging in church, not less, but we need appropriate hugging. But I don't want to disallow hugging because sometimes it goes the wrong way. There was a guy preaching seminars against hugging. And I heard about it, and I told my friends I was going to go up to him, and I was going to say, brother, you're so brave to be talking about this abomination. Old ladies being hugged. I mean, what are we doing? Allowing hugging in our... I'm so thankful you have the courage to do what you're doing, brother. Let me just give you a big hug, But I never did. They knew that I would, but I never saw him. Pets are very powerful. Never underestimate the power of a pet. There's a couple of ways you can do this. You can get a service animal. It has special training. You can get an emotional support animal. And all you need is a letter from a therapist, and you can get one of those. And sometimes you can bring it with you to places you wouldn't normally be able to bring them. And they do help you diffuse and manage emotions. So pets are cool. Weighted blankets are awesome. You can get one off Amazon for $25. This is based on the phenomena of deep touch pressure stimulation. That pressing down can help calm the central nervous system. Gardening is a very powerful therapy, you might say. Predicts reduced symptoms of anxiety and depression. Participants report a wide range of benefits. There are microbes in the soil that release serotonin in the brain. God is working on so many levels. Now, I will say, it's really great to garden in your bare feet unless you live in Florida. And then you never garden. You never even walk outside in bare feet not even sandals, because the fire ants will get you. But there are really powerful things. The smell of wood chips improves mood and calms. Crafting is really great for your mental health. All these various kinds of crafting, working with your hands to create something. Dr. Nedley is big on promoting classical music and says that it has all of these benefits, and I don't doubt at all. But I think the most powerful kind of music for mental health is the music we make ourselves. Now, I used to be a professional, semi-professional singer, but I've lost my voice, but I still sing in my room because of what it does for my mental health, and my husband likes it. And I also believe in making a joyful noise. If you play guitar, if you play piano, you know, just get the instruments out and do a little bit of music each day. And I also think that it's appropriate to turn on music and dance in your room with the door closed so none of your Seventh-day Adventist friends catch you. But I think dancing is natural and normal. And if you don't know what else to do, just put on orchestral music and pretend that you're conducting, you know, but get involved with music, but in the visceral experience of music. I think it's really good for your mental health. All right, what about formal trauma treatments? The three that have the most empirical support, and there are a number of trauma treatments, but I'm just giving you a very quick exposure here. These are the three that I understand have the most support. Number one, prolonged exposure therapy, where you basically go into situations that are triggering and you stay in them until your nervous system calms down. That's called habituation, and it helps your nervous system rewire itself. Secondly, cognitive processing therapy, where you talk through the trauma. And thirdly, EMDR, or eye movement desensitization reprocessing therapy, where you talk through the trauma as well, but you do it using eye movements, which are thought to optimize brain function, and by bilateralizing the brain is what it's called. And so that could be at work, at play, in helping the brain process. Notice that all of these involve facing triggers. Now, it's really easy to avoid triggers. What you have to do, though, if you're going to overcome the effects of trauma, is separate threats from triggers. So if you were assaulted by a tall guy with brown hair, avoid the guy, right? He's a threat. But don't avoid all tall men with brown hair, because they are not threats. And you're reinforcing your fears by avoiding triggers, and you're letting your nervous system drive the car instead of you driving the car. So what you want to do is have that dominion over your own nervous system and say, I'm going to go ahead and let myself feel uncomfortable for a while, but if you stay there in that discomfort, eventually your nervous system will rewire itself, and you will be able to calm down and face that trigger without the discomfort. Any questions or comments? You look very skeptical.
No,
You're like,
so what's the difference between prolonged exposure therapy to desensitization?
well, the main difference is the EMDR, the third one, uses eye movements to optimize brain function. And with EMDR, you're actually typically revisiting the trauma, but in narrative form, not actually physically going to traumatic triggers. But with prolonged exposure, you're more likely to actually go somewhere that you find triggering. So for instance, if a person gets assaulted in a back alley and they've been avoiding walking on the street ever since then, even in safe areas, they're going to get triggered by being even in a safe area. They're going to avoid the back alley because it's dangerous, right? It's an actual threat. But the street, the safe areas aren't a threat, but they're still getting triggered. So they're going to go there and stay there, and eventually their nervous system is going to go, okay, I guess it's all right. And you need to do that. I know it's hard. I call it courage training. Courage training is when we face our fears generally, and in particular, our triggers. Does it make sense? I mean, every day I have to, I know, I'm as much of a chicken as you are. I like to run from things. I'd much prefer to run from things. And sometimes you have to face them. And when you do, there are benefits. There are benefits to facing fears generally and also to facing triggers in specific. Any other questions? All right. So here's a little Bible study for you, and then we'll wind up. I discovered this amazing word, katergesetai, and it's often translated work. So the trying of your faith, what's the word? Works patience. Tribulation, what is it? Works patience. For this light affliction, what? Works for us. The word means work down to the end point or bring to decisive finality. I get the sense that God is saying, there's a point to all this. It's going to do something for you. Hang in there. It's uncomfortable. It's a bumpy ride, but there's something good's going to come out of it, is the sense that I get when I read passages like this. So, for example, we read 2 Corinthians 4, 8-9. Let's read it together. We are hard pressed on every side, yet not crushed. We are perplexed, but not in despair. Persecuted, but not forsaken. Struck down, but not destroyed. Notice what's being said here. We're going to get hurt. There are going to be upsets. We're going to be distressed, hard-pressed, perplexed, persecuted even, struck down. It's going to be rough, guys. It's not going to be easy. But there's a limit on how far the enemy can go. God says thus far and no further in terms of the impact of these things on us. So he does allow our nervous systems to experience injury through trauma, but there's a limit on how much damage can occur, and then God can take it from there and can strengthen us and rebuild us and actually make us stronger than we would have been otherwise. So continuing with the rest of the story, there is a phenomenon called post-traumatic growth that happens to something like 90% of people who experience trauma have some kind of growth that comes out of it. Here are the characteristics that have been established through studies. Number one, appreciation of life. You're going to appreciate life more when you almost die. Relationships with others. You're going to value your people more when you're almost taken from the face of the earth. New possibilities in life. You're going to realize, seize the day. Make sure to do everything that the Lord wants you to do and that your heart is leading you to do, because life can be taken from you in a moment. Personal strength, character development, and then finally spiritual change. A lot of people can trace their conversion back to a traumatic event that really kind of dissembled them, and then God had to rebuild them. So to me, if you're going to get all these benefits from trauma, but you're not everybody gets those benefits. It's not everyone that benefits from trauma. Some people are ruined by it. Don't you want to be one of the people that are benefited by it? How many of you want to be on that side of things? I do too. So the million-dollar question is, what are the predictors of post-traumatic growth? What are the things in our lives that are more likely to bring about that growth? Let's look at them. These are as established by science. Number one, spirituality. But again, that positive God picture, that positive God reappraisal. Number two, social support. When we have the love of our brothers and sisters around us, we need to create trauma-informed churches where people can go through something and people will come around them instead of running away from them. It's hard to go up to someone who's lost a loved one and say, I'm so sorry, and give them a hug. You don't know what to say and you feel like you're going to do it wrong. But it's better to try, I think. We need that social support. We are social creatures made in the image of a social God. There's something called acceptance coping. It is the ability to accept that something happened even though you can never accept what happened. You may never be able to accept child abuse, but you can accept that child abuse happened to you. It happened. now what is what acceptance coping does. It's a terrible thing. It's morally reprehensible. It should never exist. But that it happened to you is a fact that you cannot fight against because it's reality. And so don't fight against it. Accept it and then ask, what can I do? And very often when we experience some kind of abuse, for example, the answer to that, what can I do now, is you learn and work on preventing it happening to other people. Very often God brings testimonies out of our tests and ministries out of our miseries, right? And then finally, opportunity for emotional disclosure, when people can admit their emotions to each other. And I think in particularly when people can cry in one another's presence, we have created successfully a healing environment in that community. I'm going to talk more about this tomorrow, how to create that healing environment in church. But part of it is like not being afraid of tears, not being afraid of people's emotions. They aren't going to kill us. We have dominance. We are, God says, have dominion. We have dominion over those emotions, but we need to admit that they're there. Now, I want to share one interesting study with you in closing. This is a lady named Jane McGonigal. Jane McGonigal designs games. She's got a TED Talk. Her twin sister Kelly is also a behavioral scientist. They're fascinating people. She took research and showed a correlation between two things: the regrets of the dying and post-traumatic growth traits. The dying often lament that they worked too hard. Part of post-traumatic growth is a change of priorities, what really matters. One of the regrets of the dying is neglected relationships. PTG produces a feeling of closeness to loved ones. And you can see in the other traits that very often the things that people lament on their deathbed are things that trauma actually addresses. So here's the point. I think God is allowing these trials and difficulties and upsetting experiences and traumas even, and deep losses to prepare us to die in peace, to prepare us to do everything we can do this side of eternity, to live a life well worth living. God is trying to prevent that regret of the dying so that we can die in peace and rest in Him. Even though our outward man is perishing, yet the inward man is being renewed day by day. Are you grateful for that? Do you see your outward man perishing? I do. Every morning I'm like, oh, there's a new wrinkle I didn't even know I had. But the inward man is being renewed. Some things get better, and that is the inward man. The Bible promises it. We will develop character throughout life. For our light affliction, which is but for a moment. God isn't trying to trivialize our pain, but in the context of eternity, it is small, and it is short in duration. Everything is relative. Our light affliction, which is but for a moment, is working for us. There's that katergesetai again. Working for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory. Can you praise Jesus? Alleluia. While we do not look at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen. So there's a qualifier there. You have to look at the things that are not seen. We have to focus on the world to come, and that will help us ride through these difficulties. I just went water skiing last week with a friend of mine who was ranked first in the country at one point in his younger days. His name is Scott Green. He lives on a lake in Florida, and he has a boat, and he goes water skiing. He's very good still, and he's like becoming an old man. And I am an old woman already. So I hadn't skied since I was 10 years old. And I actually got up on my skis. I was amazed. I actually got up and went around the lake a bunch of times. And it was so weird being able to just glide over the surface of water that I would normally sink down into. But this is what God can do for us, guys, through His Holy Spirit and through looking at the things which are unseen. We can glide over the surface rather than sink down under the waves. And there will be times when we feel deep distress, but God is there with us in the water. Amen. The paragon of post-traumatic growth in the Bible, as far as I'm concerned, is Mary Magdalene. Do you know that the sense of the five senses that is the most directly connected to your emotional brain is the sense of smell? And do you know that she anointed him head to toe with this precious, very pungent aroma, spikenard? And that a week later he hung on the cross. A week later he hung on the cross sweating. And when you sweat, you exhume everything that's in your pores, and that fragrance came out. And God was able to use that to communicate right. See, because Jesus was beyond, he couldn't think. I mean, I say this with reverence, but he said, "Why have you forsaken me?" God was in Christ reconciling the world to himself, not imputing their trespasses against them. It was from the eternal counsel of peace that they made the plan that there would be this sense of separation. But God was right there with Jesus on the cross. And Jesus, at the same time, felt forsaken by God and asked God why, because he couldn't think. I think that that's an honest statement. He felt in that moment very, very powerfully. And he died from the physical ramifications of overwhelming emotion, pericardial effusion, the swelling of the sac around the heart muscle, bearing down on the heart, producing that flow of blood and water that came out of Jesus' side. I mean, he died from the physical effects of a broken heart. But there on the cross, he sweats and he smells that spikenard, and he remembers the woman that understood who he was. And she herself had been through extreme trauma. She was sexually abused by clergy and ran to another town and became demon-possessed. I can only imagine what that woman experienced in life. But she came through that and was able to be used by God to minister to him in his hour of greatest need in the most unique and creative way. Are you guys willing to give your trauma and all the trauma of all the people you work with, give it to Jesus and let him do something beautiful with it? That's my prayer. All right, so should we pray together a little in closing? And we could talk more. I'm totally open, or we can just go home and get some rest. And then we're coming back tomorrow, correct?
One p.m.
Okay. 1 p.m. tomorrow. Are we eating before or after? Food is very important to me. You have to understand.
One p.m.
Food at 1? Yeah.
So some people will come at 12:30 because the one of the
Yeah, it did say 12:30. Yeah.
so, but we will serve food at 1 o'clock.
Okay. I have to be at the airport. It's like half hour away. I have to be there.
What time is yours?
I have to leave by 4. It'll be all right.
Leave here by 4.
Yeah. I'll just bring my stuff. It'll be all right. Okay. Please don't let me get stranded in the airport again.
And we'll probably hold that in a different venue, right? Like where we had lunch today.
Yeah, that's fine.
You'll speak in there.
Do you have like a screen that I can use?
What about the TV?
Don't know. You should ask Colin.
We can get a screen.
Okay. Thanks, Colin. Colin's great.
Yes.
He's so good. You guys really have the tech thing together. You are together with the tech. It's impressive. All right, well, let's have a season of prayer, and we'll close off because you guys are probably tired, and I know I am. I'm like the Walking Dead at this point. I slept, I think, 3 hours last night. All right, okay, Pastor Kyle, will you close us out? That'd be okay. You want the mic? Where's the mic? Oh, here it is. Paul has it.
All right, let's pray. Father in heaven, Lord, this afternoon we have been blessed to hear Jennifer's testimony and her sharing about trauma and the ways that, Lord, we can grow, even in ways we maybe didn't expect from the things that happened to us in the past.
Mm-hmm.
Lord, certainly each one of us has experienced things that we wished hadn't happened. But we praise you and thank you that you are able to work all things together for good to those who love you. And that even as we just heard, Lord, that you can use those things to help us become even closer to you and fulfill the destiny that you want us to fulfill. So Lord, I thank you for this session, and I pray that for all of us, we would find that healing that only you can give in our hearts. And help us to be agents of healing to someone else. So Father, bless us now as we go our separate ways, but keep us in your care and in your presence, and bring us back tomorrow to continue to learn. And we pray for good rest for Jennifer and for all of us here. And